Hello, and welcome to Storytelling Live. So this week we bypassed the 500,000, half a million point uh, of COVID deaths. And if you've lost loved ones, or if they're ill now, I wish you great health, abundant health, and swift recovery. If you've lost loved ones, I'm very sorry they're gone. My family received a shock. The loss of one of our elders. He was a great guy. He was my uncle Arturo. Here's a photo. That's me in the King Kong shirt, and that's Eitan, my cousin, the baby. And the old guy is my grandpa Morris, and in the middle, the shaggy revolutionary dude is Uncle Arturo. And that's Uncle Oscar, who still has a beard as well, and all his hair. And he's just as beautiful as ever. And that's who we were, kind of, back then. I don't know, I loved my macrame belt, if you noticed. I don't know if I made it or if someone else made it. I think I definitely remember it, though. And I remember that King Kong shirt a lot. So my mamita's not doing that great. I call Mom my mamita. And my family's not doing that great. But, he is now, super powerful, and we can talk to him, and he can help us from the beyond here on Earth, So he's turned into an ancestor. And so I'm reading tonight a story that tells of, the backdrop is, my mother and the brothers, Arturo, Oscar, and my mom, Dora. They called her Dorita, but now she is called Dora. So, they were all born in Bogota, Colombia, and then they moved to Caracas, Venezuela. But they didn't live in town. They lived in a little sort of area called Los Campitos. So Los Campitos de Baruta, there was Baruta, which is outside, and then there was the Los Campitos, which was inside the outside of Caracas. If that makes any sense, you could find it on a map. So I asked my mother and my uncles questions about, what happened, and then I showed the story to Arturo, and he said, "None of this ever happened, man. I thought you were writing a family chronicle." Well, I had a story to tell, and I wanted it to be told by my mother as if she had written in her diary, because I remember watching her write in her diary every Saturday morning for years. And I thought, what if she was recalling this story? What would it be? What would this be? And I devised a story that would be told by my mother about our family's immigration from Poland in about 29. There's a lot to say because it's a really cute and interesting story. I don't know if I can tell it really quickly. I'll try to tell it very quickly. Grandpa had a cousin who was, now I might even be getting this wrong. He had a female cousin. No. He had a friend who was a woman. Okay, I'm not sure how it goes. He had a friend who was a woman who married his cousin. And that man had a cousin who was grandma. I think it was something like that. So grandma, they were already over in South America, and grandma was brought out from Poland just in time to avoid the ravages of the Nazi armies as they came through. I guess they went through Poland in the 30s or something like that, you know? And so everything our family left, aside from these and a few others, humans, you know, the rest, the possessions, the everything, the businesses, everything was demolished or taken over and appropriated by the Nazis. And these people grew up in South America. I hope you're still with me. I hope you haven't fallen asleep yet. Please don't. Tonight, I present to you Corn Woman, or the Baker's Wife. And you'll hear the details, and you'll hear my lies, and what is fiction, but beautiful lies, right? It's not about my mother, it's not about my uncles, but it takes place in the midst, in their fictional lives that they would have had down in Los Campitos de Baruta before they went up to the United States. I think you'll see. You'll see. I think there are some interesting details that you'll be able to pick out. And if you like the story, it's in my book, Fiercer Monsters, published in Oakland, California, by Nomadic Press in 2017, I believe. 2017. Thank you for being here. Corn Woman, or the Baker's Wife. A golem is given life with the Hebrew word emet, which means truth, marked on its forehead. There are different ways to make a golem. We talked about them when we read Frankenstein, but that's a different story. You can look back at those. They're up on the channel as well. To destroy the creature, the first letter is removed, leaving the word met, which means death. My parents moved to Venezuela from Poland. They stayed together long enough to have 3 children. Their first, Reynaldo, was born in 1934. The second, Alvaro, in 1937. And I, Juana Luisa Bolchek, was born in 1942, an afterthought. Well, that's what Alvaro told me when we were little. He was just kidding. I knew better, but sometimes it still hurts. I prefer to imagine that I was created under more, how shall we say, pleasant circumstances. Anyway, between children, My father found mostly out-of-town jobs. He was a very dedicated professional. One day, he told us he was going to Panama on a temporary assignment. Sadly, it would be his last trip. He might have hit his head or something, or forgotten us. Maybe he was in the hospital, but we were never told. Or maybe it's just me who was never told. Anyway, I was sure about two things. One, he never wrote to us. Two, he never returned. I have pleasant memories of Poppy before he left. One of his jobs was to survey landforms and road levels in the area. Once in a while, he'd let us go for the ride. He'd drive around, find a crack or bump or curve in the road, whatever he was looking for. Park, set up his telescope on a tripod, peer through it down the road, write on his clipboard, hang a little chain from the tripod. The clipboard was hanging on a little chain from the tripod. He'd write down whatever that thing told him, fold it up, hand it all through the window back to Alvaro, and we would be on our way again. I could never see anything through that telescope. It's just my eyelashes blinking back at me. Alvaro would always take the front seat and stare in silence, hypnotizing himself with the passing landscape. He would perch sideways to face the window and focus on the features of the countryside. I remember watching his eyes dart back and forth like a maniac. He looked possessed. We would often sing along with the radio. They played a lot of mariachi music back then, as well as tango. Carlos Gardel was everyone's favorite. The curvy mountain roads would sometimes make me sick. Once we had to park so I could throw up. Alvaro came over to hold my hair out of my face. Poppy sat inside and tapped the steering wheel with his thumb. He seemed agitated. He looked at his watch. He squinted down the road. That was all right. I hated throwing up, but it seemed to bother him more than it did me. I think Poppy might have blamed himself. I climbed back in the car and went on with my singing. Alvaro hopped in, sipped his cola from a bottle, and leaned his forearm out the window, on the window. Like usual, he always kept that damn window closed. Even when it was really hot, I'd have to beg him to roll it down. But life was kind of good with Father gone. There was no more yelling. The house was quiet. On weekdays, we went to an American academy to learn English. They taught elementary through high school. Reynaldo studied every night. On the weekends, Alvaro either read alone or stayed out late with his friends. Mommy didn't mind. She was lenient with the boys, but preferred that I stay home. She tried to teach me needlework and cooking whenever possible, for as long as I could stand it. I had no patience for rules or measurements in my free time, however. Los Campitos de Baruta was south and west of Caracas, deep in a nest of rolling hills. Today, I believe it has been absorbed by Caracas. What used to be empty woods is now quite populated. In my time, Los Campitos was built around one road, with a church at the far end, up against a grove of trees. In front of the church was a large square, a plaza, where we had dances and festivals. The road was lined with shops that every little community needs: a baker, a butcher, and flowers, and blankets, and dry goods, crafts, a repair shop. My brothers and I knew every shopkeeper. But then again, everyone knew everyone. Over anyone else in my memory, the baker was the most remarkable figure of our town. Although few people knew him well, our little town was rife with hearsay, love, and jealousy, so it's difficult to decipher truth from fiction. Nevertheless, today, 60 years later, I still think about his story. So I'm writing it down. And for now, it will stay in my diary. But maybe one day, my children or my grandchildren will publish it. Who knows? Anyway, Mommy told me the baker was also Jewish, or that he was very impressed with Jewish tradition and stories from Europe. She says he spoke intensely with Poppy when we first moved there. He asked many questions about Eastern Europe and the history of our people. My guess is that Poppy had little to share. Reynaldo nicknamed our baker Tortero because he made the best tortillas and arepas we'd ever tasted. Toro, tortilladero, Reynaldo would say, or torero, tortero, for short. It was a name given in admiration. The baker did not mind. He used an ancient press of solid black iron called La Tortilladora. The name, literally translated to English, means the tortilla maker, but if you take the suffix dora, you have a common feminine first name, which means golden or of gold. The breads from that press had more of a golden taste than color, but were unmatched in neighboring towns. My brothers, and I made up a story about the baker, that the press that made the tortillas was his wife, and that he made love to his wife every morning, and that their babies were the magnificent breads that kept our town fed and happy and closely knit. Tortero was single. He was in fact married to his work. It consumed him from the hours before dawn until sundown, when he would busy himself preparing dough for the following day. Sometimes, after dark, we would see a light from the window at the back of his store. He lived behind his bakery. The building was a large thatched bungalow with a business entrance on the street, a side door for kitchen deliveries, and a back door, which was actually the front door to his apartment. So he had a study, a living room, and a bedroom there in the back. Behind the shop, there was a dirt yard with a few bushes, a large oak tree with a bench built around the trunk, and a wide grill. His screen door was usually propped open on hot evenings. Sometimes Tortero would sip beer and smoke stinky tobacco with the shoe repairman. They would mumble and laugh together. They were funny to watch. Like two fuzzy old dogs. It was okay for us kids to be playing in his yard, and sometimes he would play kickball with us, but we'd inevitably get yelled at because there were too many things in the way, like his grill, or the trees or the bushes, or his window. Yes, I cracked his window. Once. I cried and ran in and said I was sorry. He offered me a pan dulce de guayaba, but I never liked them much. Not enough sugar. Too much dough. I said, no thank you, and that I would pay for the window out of my own pocket. I didn't get into as much trouble as I thought. My brothers fixed it for me. We found a cheap window in Caracas that Mommy paid for. Reynaldo and Alvaro finished the work in about an hour, and I was very grateful. One summer evening, we were playing hide-and-go-seek in the church plaza. I looked under a wagon, but found someone there. Someone else was behind a little planter box I liked. So, no. I tried the barrel in front of the flower shop, but couldn't keep out of sight. I checked behind the flower shop, and then I saw the bench under Tortero's tree. No one would ever find me there. I crawled under it and waited for 20 minutes. It was maybe the greatest hiding place ever, but also extremely boring. No one ever did find me. Maybe no one looked for me. I got up to sneak back to the plaza to win the final round. I heard Alvaro calling me home, but I didn't want him to find me before I could tag the plaza. I passed by Tortero's side door when the odd color of light caught my eye. It was a sleepy, dull yellow, lit by a couple lanterns, one on the wall, one on his desk. A breeze touched my face, and high above the branches of the great oak tree, a black cloud took shape in the evening sky. He had left his side door open to let the breeze flow through the kitchen. I could smell the heat of his ovens. I thought, what if I just poked my head in, just to see if he would notice me? It seemed like nobody was home. I slipped in quietly through the doorway. I was grinning. I thought it would be funny to yell, "Boo!" and startle him at his desk. But he wasn't there. Where was Tortero? Maybe he had seen me first and he was going to sneak up on me while I was sneaking up on him. Alvaro called me again from the plaza. Oh, what was this? I found him asleep on his couch. Then I noticed his legs sticking out from under a blanket. His foot was bare and smooth, like a woman's. It was a woman's leg. She looked dead. She lay there absolutely still. Her face was covered, and her leg from below the knee was sticking out in the air over the arm of the couch. I backed quietly out of the study, slunk back through the kitchen, ran out into the night, ran right up into Alvaro's arms. It was late by then, and the other children had gone home. "What's the matter with you?" he said. "Think Tortero's found a wife, but she's dead." Alvaro told me that I was silly and we would go back over and check on the baker. He was certain it was Tortero lying on the couch. He took me by the hand. No one had ever seen the baker with a woman friend, but then he knew every woman in town, so why not? Why wouldn't one of them come over, maybe have some tea, then fall asleep on his couch? Maybe he was in the bathroom or went to the bedroom closet for a sweater or something. We didn't want to bother the baker with nosy questions, so we snuck up to the window. Alvaro held me out of the way and pressed his face up to the glass. He saw the baker. He was reading a large book at his desk and then periodically standing and moving his lips and bobbing his head forward in a rhythmic fashion like men do in temple. He wore a skull cap, a kippah. Alvaro stood back from the window. He let me peer in. I stood on a box. He pointed, whispering, "See, there's the baker right there. He's fine." He took me by the arm away from the window. "Hey!" I grabbed the windowsill to hang on, but it was crusty and old. Part of it fell off in my hands. On hearing the noise, the baker, normally a mild-tempered man, dropped what he was doing and flew to the window, yelling. He tore off his prayer shawl, held it in his fist, and shook it at us. He yelled at us to get away, get out, but we were out. We ran away and went home. And no one told Mamita what happened that night. But boy, was she curious. We couldn't tell her. Maybe she didn't really want to know because it would force her to do her job as a mother to prevent us from doing anything interesting. We did tell Reynaldo. With Reynaldo, we made plans to find out exactly what the baker was up to. A late night of stealth and sneaking was gonna be most amusing. We had no plans to expose the baker or to accuse him of any wrongdoing. We felt it was too far out of his character to have actually killed anyone. Or was it? The idea of a midnight spy mission was certainly very amusing. We already knew he had a dead woman on his couch, so who knew what else we could discover? As part of the arrangement, I would put on my pajamas and go to bed as usual. No one told Mommy. I kissed her good night, set some clothes next to the bed. After she turned out the lights, Alvaro would come and wake me up to leave. I was so excited, but I found it hard to sleep. I kept tossing and turning, dreaming of the baker's crazy face stretching out in an elongated scream from inside a glass cage. But what I wanted to happen wasn't what my brothers wanted to happen. Alvaro and Reynaldo woke me up the next morning. What? Why didn't you? I said, rising and rubbing my eyes. Shh, said Reynaldo and covered my mouth. You're too little. What do you mean? I'm 9 years old. I'm big now. You're too young to come out with us so late at night. We just checked on a few things and didn't stay long. You would have made too big a deal out of it. Okay, I was frustrated. So, tell me, what did you find? I said, folding my arms and sitting up in bed. Nothing but an old witch woman who says she's coming to get you, he said, tickling me. Stop it, I said, trying to push him away. You cut it out right now. Tell me what you saw. What's all the noise about? Mommy yelled. Shh, I said, Reynaldo, you get Mama in on this, man. Nothing, Ma. We'll have our breakfast right away. Or we'll help with breakfast right away. Alvaro sat on the bed next to me. Okay, I'll tell you. It's just this. Yes, Tortero does seem to have a woman sleeping still on the couch. He stays up very late, studying from a big old book and praying. He and Reynaldo looked at one another. We think she's sick because he stands over the couch and prays and then goes back to the table. We were there pretty late. He was still up. She's covered with that blanket, head to toe now, and she doesn't move. She's probably really sick. But who she was, nobody knew. Then suddenly, one day, she appeared. She was selling bread at the counter while Tortero worked the ovens. This was to be the new way. It was good for him, too. He seemed happy. He took more time off. He sat out back, watching his tree, smoking tobacco, chatting with people. He played kickball with us. Who's the woman? People would ask. My cousin, he would say. The daughter of his uncle's wife from Tierra Linda, to stay with him and help with the bakery. Ah, well then, they would say. You'd have to ask the baker because she was such a quiet woman. She didn't need to talk much. She only responded to her business questions like, when will you have this or that kind of bread? Or, how much is so and so? She was pretty. Perhaps beautiful. A bit quiet. And downward looking. She had dark skin and rich, unruly black hair. Also, she had a few very thick hairs growing between her eyebrows. They were not easy to miss, as her eyes were black and dramatic, edged with thick lashes and topped by those eyebrows, which looked like two black caterpillars with slender tails, ready to joust one another. We liked her. We really did. People began to wonder if Tortero wasn't perhaps having relations with her. Why not? She was pretty, helpful, and within a few weeks, she was starting to show. Did she arrive pregnant? Maybe that's why he brought her to Los Campitos, but because her boyfriend in Tierra Linda left her pregnant and she wanted to have a new life here. Well, no problem, we understood. Nobody really knew. I heard the people saw them sitting close at church, letting their thighs touch. I believe what they say because I saw the pair lightly touching fingers as if they couldn't help it while walking through the marketplace. She was looking radiant in a white cotton dress with her shoulders uncovered and her belly was getting huge. Soon it became clear that they were probably lovers. The touching, the glances, and the hand-holding increased. The town was quiet in their presence, but rumors abounded. Why would he have a child with his cousin? Is she his cousin? She's not his cousin, they would say. She's a prostitute he brought in from another town who wanted to reform and start a new life. Every theory they'd make up was outlandish or plain ridiculous. They would make up anything to satisfy their cravings for information. So what? I thought, if they have a child. Who cares if it's his or not? He loves her, and he's kind to her. And that's all any family could hope for. I hoped that God would bless me with a man so gentle and caring. That was how I felt. Once, about a year later, some children playing the kickball under the huge oak tree lost control of the ball and it happened to hit Tortero's woman in the back of the head. It was embarrassing to watch. She'd been looking even more beautiful and elegant lately after the birth of the child. Her hair had grown, smooth and long. The child was plump and precious and somewhat freckled. They lavished the little boy with love and called him Pinto. His real name was Pedro. But when the ball hit her in the head, on the head, it seemed to touch something deep within her that we, nor she, had ever seen before. Who knows what was behind it, but she turned slowly around. She turned slowly in. Without actual anger, she stated plainly, it would be safer for you to play in the plaza. Her calm attitude had a chilling effect. The kids were shocked because they'd never heard her give a direct order. She'd been such a shy and quiet person. Well, then, the moment got worse. In the silence, as we were gawking, someone, a kid, yelled, "You had a child by your cousin!" And the lid was off. From that moment on, "Baker's got a girlfriend!" She went inside. Other comments were made, but Tortero and some shop owners chased the kids out and told them to play in the plaza. The kids were no longer interested in their game. They scattered home, grunting and kicking up dirt as they shuffled in different directions. I thought the kids were nasty to taunt her like that. She hadn't been so mean. She had put her foot down and they couldn't handle it. Anyway, they were just looking for a reason to repeat all the fiction the town had been dreaming up. Most of the kids' mothers brought them in by the ear to apologize at the bakery counter. Some did not, because they believed the hearsay. Despite all the buzz about the woman and Tortero, it was never confirmed whether they were an item or not. In fact, it turned out that young men cultivated fantasies about her and overtly sought her attention. Despite her obvious closeness to the baker, she would smile and chat at the counter, but never gave anybody any ideas. And that's how things got a little bumpy on the night of the Festival of Lights. And this is a celebration where our town dolls itself up with lanterns and streamers that crisscross the plaza in bright colors. Everyone participates. Musicians set up and play in the square. It is traditionally a time when young men ask out the young women they care for. Well, nobody asked me out, but Mommy and I strolled down to see how it all looked. There were people in small groups wandering with bottles of booze, locked arm over shoulder, some young couples, and groups of young guys laughing and yelling down the street. When we passed girls practicing the steps to a dance they all knew. I didn't know it. I was clumsy, but I didn't care. If I wanted to have fun, I just danced around like a freak, cranked my arms and waggled my knees a lot. Everyone would laugh and sometimes join in, and that was okay with me. Then, we heard screams. People rushed to the grove of trees behind the church. Apparently, one of the young bucks had made advances on the baker's woman. Then, after refusal, he and his soccer gang had closed in and chased her up into the woods. And she was surrounded. She was immensely strong. In her efforts to escape, she broke one of the young men's arms. It was his screams we heard. She fled further into the wilderness outside our town. The young men went home. Tortero took some friends and went looking for her. They found her, walking alone, at the top of a steep hill, wringing her hands. She was unresponsive to their calls. Who knows what those guys had done? Tortero walked gently over. She never made eye contact. He reached out. Once he was close enough, she threw him right down the hill. Instead of trying again, he just picked himself up, brushed himself off, and went home. He looked bruised and worried. The following truth replaced rumors for the next week. She was out there, wandering the hills, so agitated she couldn't come down, and Tortero had left her alone to wander. But what could he do? Chase her, tie her up, throw over a horse, and force her to stay home on the couch until she got over it? Or is that how it all started? I wondered. And we all wondered. Soon came reports that she was sneaking through the town late at night, growling in the alleys and scratching at people's windows. I'm glad I never heard that firsthand. I'd be really scared. They said her hair was thicker and more tangled than ever. Her skin was dirty and smudged, and she slunk around town completely naked, like an animal. She would beat up drunk men late at night as they stumbled home. I thought it was funny because now families knew when a man had been out getting drunk. He'd show up at breakfast with a black eye or welts on his face. Oh, so the bruja got you, they would say. That'll teach you to drink. Well, bully for her, I thought. Now we've got a superhero. But the children were afraid, including her own child. Flower pots were tossed, windows were broken, and other random malevolent acts occurred every night. No one actually saw her do it, but there was no end to the "I came face to face with a naked savage woman" tales. Little Pinto got more and more cranky and wouldn't sleep at night. Tortero had to constantly care for the baby, and it was really tough on him. An older girl, Lupita, came forward to help the poor man. Things went better, but the baker's cousin never came back down from the hills. She never came back down. Months later, she was spotted soaking her feet in a mud puddle, back propped against a tree, having animated conversations with a stray dog, sleeping next to her. She was muddy, with bloody scratches, and still noble. She'd covered herself with a ragged ruana. When the neighbors brought Tortero to talk with her, she erupted in laughter. She told them many exposing things about the baker. She insulted him directly and pointed at him with a long and crooked fingernail. He was silent and lowered his head. The others didn't know whether they should be looking at him or her or the dog. It was embarrassing for everyone. She spat her words out through teeth that had rotten or broken off. She was a scary sight to behold. Tortero tried to reason with her, but she threw mud at him and yelled, "I hate you! I wish I'd never been born! I can't stand what you did to me, you desperate son of a bitch! Pig!" And no one understood what she meant by that. Could it have been the pregnancy? But the way she delivered it was clear enough. They stood back to let Tortero calm her down gently, in whatever manner possible, to try to communicate in their own intimate language. However, something he said definitely did not work. She lunged at him. The two started wrestling frantically in the mud. She soon had him pinned and was choking the life out of him. The neighbors ran to peel her off. And as they pulled her away, she dropped down to her knees in front of Tortero, sobbing heavily. And when they let go, she grabbed for his legs, not to knock him down, no, but instead to hug him, as if she was a little girl. "Honey, I'm sorry," she said. "Please let me die. I want to die now." The baker cried and pet her hair, which had so much dirt and leaves in it. It looked like the hide of an animal. He looked over at the tiny crowd that had come to help. They stared back at him. Unnerved by the woman and her repeated requests to die, he asked them to please go away so the two could be alone. And they did. He had no idea how he was going to get through this, but he seemed quite resolved. "Of course he's not going to kill her. Don't be silly," someone said. They were boiling with curiosity. So the little crowd walked behind some trees to hide. And they stayed far enough out of sight, but not too far to prevent them from keeping an eye on Tortero and his wife. And here's what they saw. She knelt down in front of him, crying into his kneecaps. Her arms were wrapped around his legs. He stooped over her, stroking her hair again and again. He backed away. She lost balance, but he helped her stay upright. Then he took to his knees in front of her, so they were on the same level. They hugged one another gently for a long time. They did not say a word or even utter a sound. Then he held her face in his hands. He kissed her on the mouth. He kept holding her face, and she looked up at him, a little cross-eyed, both sad and happy. And then, with his thumb, he rubbed the area where her eyebrows grew together. Her eyes rolled up in her head as she closed them. She looked very relaxed. He wiped again, and with a frown, she slipped from his arms as if she had fainted from exhaustion. And the Ruan became the biggest thing between the two of them. Soon it covered her completely. Fallen leaves from the tree mounded up against her, hiding her entirely from sight. And then she was gone. Did she get up and go somewhere? They lost track of her through the trees. What happened? Is she gone? They came to the baker and asked, finding nothing but leaves where she had been sitting. Is she dead? Said someone else. The baker was scooping a large pile of corn flour into the old blanket. She's gone. He smiled, and his face was wet from tears. At the same time, Pinto, who had been sleeping at the bakery, he also disappeared, Lupita was beside herself with worry. Tortera was still out in the hills with the others. She'd gone to the back room to check on the baby, only to find his crib a complete mess. She said it looked like he had crawled into a pile of masa, ate some, and threw it up in his crib. It was slopped all over the little bed, but nowhere else. Pinto was nowhere to be found. Lupita looked for the child everywhere. She went to every house she could think of. She came by our place. We had only ever seen the boy on a couple of occasions, much less take him into our home without them knowing about it. When Tortero and the others came down from the hills, Lupita was distraught, but he didn't seem too concerned. He hugged her and held her hand and said that the child was now with his mother and wouldn't be coming back. I wonder if that made her stop worrying. On the following Monday, the breads were sweeter than usual. The town remarked how delicious they were. The arepas he made on that day were truly of a light and crispy texture and a flavor that I have never tasted before or since. Mommy brought some home wrapped up in towels and handed me one. It was still hot from his oven. She had an excited look on her face. You'll never believe what happened. The baker has announced his intention to marry the baby's caretaker. He's made special arepas and is giving them to anyone who comes to his shop. What was in those arepas? I wondered. Hope? Heartbreak? A baker's tears? 3 months later, he married Lupita at the church. Everyone showed up. Everyone in 5 towns showed up. It was incredible. Anyone who had ever tasted his bread or knew about his baking showed up. His odd history and his misfortunes always went with the notoriety of his breads. Anyone who ever heard the tales that stretched from him in every direction came to wish him luck for the future. They were happy for the next year. And then she miscarried. Poor Tortero was gloomy. He would stamp around the shop and get impatient with the customers. He'd yell at the kids. No one played in his yard anymore, so he'd go over to the plaza to yell at them. He'd even go out to the soccer fields to yell at them. The kids left him alone. My brothers were gone to school in the United States by that time. It was just Mommy and me living in a little house with Alvaro's empty chicken coop behind it. Tortero and Lupita left town. She was seen a couple times in the market, but no one knew where they were staying. They had disappeared long enough for us to find good bread for everyone, but of course we had to buy it in Caracas. They took turns driving twice a week and set up a table in the plaza to hand out the bread. Mommy and I couldn't drive, so we would ride along with our neighbors and help lug the loaves around in big baskets. The smell of fresh bread eased my car sickness a great deal, by the way. One day, it was the shoe repairman's turn to drive. He had gone with the flower lady and her family. They gained a juicy tidbit of information on the way home. You'll never guess who's coming back, they said. Yeah, the baker. And they have a newborn with them. Did they adopt? No, he insists it's his own. He insists it is his own. Yes, we saw them. They were walking by the roadside. They expect to return in a few weeks. They send you all their best and can't wait to see you. then we should have a welcome party. Despite his antisocial habits, most people understood and wanted their nutty old tortero back. We all missed his bread. Yes, there would be a very warm welcome home party for him and his beautiful young bride and their newborn. The ladies couldn't wait to meet the baby. I admit, I was curious too, just to see how the little guy resembled his papa with the newborn tadpole face. I was there. I was there. When the baker opened up his bungalow and invited people in to meet the newborn, they were hushed and giggled. 2 women prodded and primped the baby's little lair, the same one Pinto had used, and tended to his collar. I admit this one did look more like Tortero and even had something of his mother in him. But it was hard to ignore the fact that he had 4 distinct marks between his eyebrows. They were barely darker than his skin, almost like freckles. One of the women licked her thumb to wipe them, thinking it was dirt. "Hey, don't do that," he snapped. Tortero's eyes bulged out of his head. He had been gabbing and crowing across the room. "She was just helping," they told him. "I got this. You don't need to help. But thank you." He grinned nervously. His hand was shaky. He smiled and gestured at the table. He looked around at everyone. "Don't worry about a thing. Just eat some cake and enjoy yourselves. We'll take good care of the baby. Thank you. Thank you all." So that wraps up that story. Well, we're at almost an hour. So I'm going to probably save the other stories for another time. But yeah, I'll be reading more from this book, from other things. And I'm so glad you could show up tonight. You know, I didn't sleep well last night at all, man. And I'm very tired and exhausted now. I've had a headache all day. You know, grief surfaces in different ways for different people, different times. I'm going to show you one picture of my uncle you'll never forget. Ready? Here it is. Okay? Now you'll never forget him. Now you'll know my uncle was actually Einstein, right? Okay. Well, thank you for your letters. Thank you for staying in touch. Thank you for following this program. And yeah, tip jar. Just every little bit helps. Thank you very much. This is my favorite tie, as a matter of fact. I wore it tonight, and it's for my deal, Arturo. And most of what you heard about my family was false. But, you knew that from the outset, right? Okay. Thank you very much. Good night.